Hello and welcome back to Final Fantasy Reconstructed. Last time we picked up the Mystic Key there from the Elf Prince, as you can see. We have a nice icon there for the key now. The Mystic Key is our description, but we have a nice key icon. I don't know if that icon appears in the vanilla version. I'm guessing it doesn't. I'm guessing that's a newly inserted icon, so very cool to have that. And if you remember, according to some of the NPCs here, the Elfland Castle was raided by Astos. So not only did Astos come and do mean stuff to the prince, he raided the treasury. So there's a difference between vanilla version. It seems that I've noticed fewer Mystic Key locked doors in this reconstructed hack. The ones in the Temple of Fiends, it's simply open, but it's guarded by a gargoyle battle. And rather than being just an invisible trapped square, it is a sprite-initiated battle, kind of like the bosses are in the vanilla version. So you talk to a sprite, and when you close the text box, you enter a boss battle. So I suppose that means that rather than the trapped squares, which you can reinitiate the battles over and over and over again just by stepping off and stepping back on, those sprite-initiated battles can only happen once. I don't believe the vanilla version does that with anything except bosses. There aren't any rando enemies like that, although I suppose you could count those gargoyles as a boss, even though they appear as random enemies before. But a good example would be in the Marsh Cave before. You have the Wizards battle. In the vanilla version, the Wizards, you can just fight the Wizards by stepping off and stepping onto that square over and over again. Here I've noticed that after going to Elfland, I did not save at the inn, save and recover my magic, so I'm heading back to the inn. Here's the bomb enemy. I think I've seen the bomb enemies before. I'm not sure which enemy the bombs replaced in the vanilla version, because I'm assuming that in this hack, and this is an assumption by me, that there are still only 128 different enemies, numbered imps at 001 all the way to chaos at 128. So I'm not sure. Again, that's an assumption, because I think that would require a little bit more involved hacking, and there might not be enough space in the ROM to have more enemy slots than that. So I'm assuming that replaced another kind of enemy. I'm not sure which one it replaced. But of course, bombs would become a staple of later Final Fantasies. So that ties this. It brings this game a little bit more in line with modern Final Fantasies. This hack of the game to have bombs represented. Now I don't know if bombs have in this game a self-destruct type move. There isn't any self-destruct type move in the vanilla game. So I'm assuming that if those bombs do have an AI routine with abilities or spells, I assume that they just use some fire elemental abilities or spells, like the all-targeting ability like Cremate, or possibly Fire 2. I haven't really fought them. I've been running from them because they have tended to appear with those cobras. And even though poison has been made a little bit less punishing in this hack, I decide not to do that too much. Now, in the Northwest Castle here, that was a Mystic Key locked door. And in the vanilla version, the chests are protected by a battle with undead. So I'm taking a stab at seeing if these gremlins happen to have the undead trait with the cleric hammer, which casts harm 1 on all enemies. Now, it did nothing there, so I determined that these gremlins are indeed not undead. But that appears to be a trapped square right there in front of the door. And no trap square in front of that chest. And this video, by the way, is going to be a collect-a-thon. So this video will take us up to the Earth Cave. So I'm upgrading my my armor there. I'm just checking 32 and 33 for defense and evasion. So defense up a little bit and evasion down a little bit. There's the Power Staff and the Falchion. The Power Staff in the vanilla version is known of being as Sola, for whom one of my characters is named, the Power Staff of Uselessness. He calls it the Power Staff of Uselessness because it isn't a very good offensive weapon. It doesn't, despite what the name would suggest, at least in the vanilla version, it doesn't have any secondary battle abilities. You would think that something named the Power Staff would cast a spell, would be one of your early spellcasting items, but it doesn't. But its cost at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's how much it costs, is 12,345, is nice to sell. So it's really just a nice chunk of gold in the vanilla version. I'm speculating that it was probably supposed to cast something, so that's a trap square, so you see we can initiate the fight again, but we have a chance to strike first, which actually means that this battle is runnable. At least if it in the vanilla version, that would mean that this battle was runnable. No battle that you could get a surprise attack or a first strike attack on was unrunnable. Okay, so that's important to note in the vanilla version. I'm assuming that that's been left alone here, but again, that's just an assumption. In the ZZ hack, Zonk Miles worked in a can't escape prompt at the beginning of the battle so that the player would know which battles were escapable and which were not. Here I'm just kind of checking out the world map tiles. It looks like the textures might be slightly different here in the world map. I haven't detected many big changes in the layout of the world map. But it looks like some of the textures and tile sets are a little bit different. The mountains definitely have a better look to them that I believe was borrowed from a later NES Final Fantasy. The original vanilla Final Fantasy mountains just looked like a big pile of snow. There wasn't really a lot of peaks. It was hard to distinguish any peaks in the mountains. So in this video, we're just going to be collecting everything that we can from the chests that are locked by the Mystic Key. And it's going to take us a little bit less time than the collect-a-thon normally would, because at least when I went through the Marsh Cave in this run, I did not notice any locked doors by the Mystic Key. In the vanilla version, there are some Mystic Key locked doors down there, but it's in my opinion, not at all worth it to go back down there to collect the treasures you get. You don't get anything unique that I can recall. I think you might get another set of iron armor, another large dagger or something. I might be wrong on that, so I hesitate to even make a guess. But I think what you find down there is pretty mundane. But I did not, in this Marsh Cave, notice anything. Now, this Marsh Cave, if you remember, it was much more, I would call it player-friendly. It wasn't easy per se, but it was not just a big sprawling space that you could get lost in and battle all kinds of nasties. So the battles in the sea, for a little bit yet, are still worth fighting, especially if they include a Kaizoku. Because I'm still trying to build that gold up just a little bit, but at this point, where I am now, 59 experience is a little bit on the light side. Okay, so here we're heading up to Caneria Castle. And what I'm doing right here is I'm going to test out the Power Staff to see if the Power Staff has indeed been given magical powers in this hack. So we're going to take a look when Garand there attempts to use that Power Staff, and we'll see if it casts anything for us. If not, we're just going to sell it when we get to town. Moment of truth. Nothing happens. So now I know that the Power Staff is safe to sell, and I'm guessing that it's maintained its value because that's kind of a long-running joke in the vanilla version. And when you're creating a hack, I've played lots of different hacks of this game. It's interesting. I've not ever created one, but I played several of them and had a great time with them. All right, here's our Mystic Key locked room. So you can see a lot more chests in here. I think you only have 6 chests in the vanilla version in Caneria Castle. So some of the chests may have been moved. So nothing jumping out at us there. There's the rune sword. A silver hammer. Money, money, money. There's the wear sword. The rune sword. There's our TNT. So that key item is the same. I have yet to go visit the Dwarf Cave. And a silver knife. So I haven't talked to Narek to see what he says pre-TNT. So I'm not sure what the Dwarf Cave is going to look like. So that text prompt stays the same. But this one, the text prompt, he does change his his text. So kind of like the sages in the circle of sages, they changed their text prompt, a couple of them, based on how many crystals you have lit, and that sage there changes his text prompt based on whether or not you possess the mystic key. But interestingly, the other one doesn't. Anyway, like I was saying, when you're creating a hack like this, here I'm just going to be selling a lot of things and checking stats. You have to balance when you're creating a hack, I think, whether, trying to rebalance the game to what would be more or less quote-unquote correct. There isn't really a correct answer in that. You have to balance that with being faithful to the original game, and that sometimes includes some of the wackiness of the original game, some of the things that players really love about the original game, even if they might not make much sense or they might be slightly out of balance. For example, leaving Garland's text as "I, Garland, will knock you all down." Clearly, that makes very little sense in English. That is just a very poorly translated, either that or heavily censored way to say, "I will kill you all." But that's become a beloved part of Final Fantasy lore. And in a lot of official remakes of this game, in total retranslations, they still have Garland say, "I will knock you all down." Although a young person playing this game without the context of this game would go, "Well, that's really weird." Even though us back in 1990, when I played this game, I was a couple years old by the time I picked up my copy of this game on NES. It was like, "Knock you all down." And then I was like, wow, this guy's like such a BA. This guy's rocking, knocking you all down. So things like the power staff, which is indeed worth 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's kind of an out-of-whack item. It doesn't really seem to belong at this part of the game, and its value really outweighs what it can do. So clearly there was a mistake there, or they made an intentional choice that's just really odd. So as a building a hack of this game, you have to decide, how do you want to be faithful to some of the things that are out of whack. Now, for this patch and this hack, they did choose to go ahead and leave the power staff in the game. First of all, leave it in the game, and make it worth the same amount of money and still make it not cast any spell. So they left that in, which I think is a good on that one. You'd have to kind of pick and choose the things you want to leave in. Some of the things that are maybe less fair, less player-friendly, especially to modern players. Those you're likely to leave out when I've played other hacks of this game, but little gems like that, the Power Staff of Uselessness and Garland's text. I know I've rambled on quite a bit about that, but we're still just in the phase of selling off our unused items, which is also another critical part of the Mystic Key sequence in the vanilla version, is collecting all of these duplicate pieces of armor or pieces of armor that have been outpaced by things that you can buy or have found in the Marsh Cave, like the iron armor. So you're just kind of selling off all of your first round of equipment. Now that your armor slots especially are starting to fill up, you need to start making way for that. I did pick up the Rune Sword and the Were Sword, and I'm keeping them. Now, in the NES version of the game, the vanilla version, for anyone who doesn't know, the enemy-type swords, the Elemental and the Rune Swords and the Were Swords and everything else, completely bugged, do not work at all. They just function as normal weapons. So the Flame Sword doesn't do any more or less damage to fire or ice enemies. The Dragon Sword doesn't do any more or less damage to dragon-type enemies. Now, these enemy types and elementals really are the same in this game. It's not the types and elemental alignments kind of are in the same family in terms of how the game's coded. So the Weir Sword is supposed to do more damage to Weir-type enemies, but there's only a few of those types of enemies in the game, and it's hard to predict when you might run into them. The same thing really with the Rune Sword for mage-type enemies, although possibly Astos may have been a magic-type enemy. I'd have to check that. So theoretically it would do more against Astos, but you don't get it until after Astos. So until later on in the game, when you start fighting things like the elf sprites that share a sprite with Astos, but they are like the fighter and the mage and other magic type enemies, maybe the eye, you wouldn't really have a chance to use the Rune Sword, and by then you have better weapons anyway. So they're kind of curious swords to put in this game, and I'd like to try out some of the enemy type weapons in this game. For example, the Rune Sword, Weir Sword, Dragon Sword. So I'm hanging on to them where normally I just usually dump them. In a vanilla version especially, where they're not any more or less effective than the Silver Sword, which, much like many later versions of this game, the Silver Sword has been taken out of Elfland. I'm guessing it's been moved on to Crescent, where all the other silver stuff is, or at least pops up in the vanilla version to Crescent Lake. We will see. Right now, the Longsword is my best choice on that. So I'll be using the Longsword with my fighter for now. Not being able to switch weapons in battle even further reduces the effectiveness of the enemy-type weapons. Here I hit level 10. Because you would have to know going into a battle that you're going to fight a Weir-type enemy. Now, one place where it could be useful is in the Hall of Giants in the Earth Cave, where when you pick up the Giant Sword later, you can go to the Hall of Giants and you know every tile you're going to fight a Giant-type enemy. But even then, you'd have to not have a better weapon in hand that would just do more damage even without a slight boost from the enemy type. And I believe the Rune and Weir Swords in the vanilla version you pick up in the Temple of Fiends. So here's the Dwarf Cave. Colors have been changed pretty significantly here. It's a little bit brighter in here. The Dwarf Cave has a much more earthy red and brown. Okay, we have references to the floater. There's a reference to the Earth Cave, marsh around the Earth Cave. Okay, we have an interesting sign for an inn and a pub, and here I hit a random battle with a Lamia, which I fought as a single enemy back in the Marsh Cave as a boss, protecting the Cleric Hammer, if I remember. And then the Zomblin, which is, I'm assuming because of the Zom prefix, that my Cleric Hammer will work on it. Now, the Lamia here has some significant evasion there, so we see our attacks missing. So this is just casting Harm 1. So it's going to do, you know, right around 50 damage, a little bit more, a little bit less. But Fire has a good chance to double when cast off of the Black Mage. And Fire 2, I should say, has a good chance to double and do a lot more damage, as would, I think, Harm 2, but I'm not wasting my spell charges here. So this was kind of a surprise. Trapped Square is right in the middle of the Dwarf Cave here with a pretty significant enemy. You know, the Lamia was no joke when I fought her by herself, and you can see the Zomblins are taking a few shots. And the Lamia there has status attack Sleep. I don't think I noticed that down in the Marsh Cave. Now, the ZZZZ icon there in Zonk's Square is pretty cool. I believe that has been updated, although I don't remember getting put to sleep. You know, sleep doesn't happen as often to your characters. And I go over to try to track this Moogle, and I hit another trap square immediately to the right of the other trap square. So, surprise here, and I'm nervous that I'm going to get wiped out because I'm running low on spell charges. I didn't heal up all the way. I was not quite sure what to expect from walking up to this this counter with the Moogle. This is very much a surprise, and now we have two Lamias. I'm going to see if I can get rid of these Zomblins with my biggest spells. And that Fire 2 did not double in damage, so you can see the 152 versus 52. That means that on that elemental spell, it rolls a 2-hit roll, interestingly, in this game. And if your elemental spells land on their 2-hit roll, it doubles their range. So if they don't land the 2-hit roll, it does the base range of the damage. If they do hit, then it rolls double that base range. It's interesting. So yes, fire does between 30 and 60 base, between 30 and 60. If it doubles, that goes from 60 to 120, and then if the enemy's weak, it gets an additional amplification on that. I'm just checking some numbers there. Here I'm going with Temper, just to see if I can help take out the Lamia enemy. Although with the status attack Sleep, the Lamia really could wipe us out. I'm noticing that Ice is pretty effective on the Lamia. seems like more effective than the fire enemy, and the Lamia does indeed get our fighter to sleep, unfortunately. So it was just Sulla there getting his hits in. But you can see the growth of the black belt has been, as I expected, pretty impressive, both in terms of damage, crit rate, and then once we hit those 4 hits, we're really going to start rolling out the criticals. Okay, so massive experience in gold from these battles, and I can't talk to the Moogle across the table, so I thought that would be the case. Later, Super NES Final Fantasies, you could talk to someone across a counter. Here I go out just to save the game, to save my progress. I'm not sure what to expect after that. I might run into more trap squares, so just to save the experience in gold, I did that. So here, again, can't talk to him over the counter, but we built in the counters to have I assume that was because we're building in a more modern Final Fantasy experience. Now, something I would like to see in a hack like this with extra tile sets and sprites built in is, for example, those barrels right there have kind of a black border around them. Something I would like to see, and I don't know how possible this is, because I don't think you can have transparency in sprites in NES games. You'd have to have barrels built, rather than having the black border around them in a square, have them match the surrounding tiles so that the barrels didn't have that. Now, here's Narek, and this is interesting because I didn't come here before the Mystic Key, but Narek himself acts as a Mystic Key gate, because you can't get through him to even get to these chests before you have the Mystic Key and get the TNT to send him away. So there's the Dragon Sword, effective against Dragon-type enemies. Silver armor will be good for me. Money, 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 money. There's a house. So that's an interesting bit of gating right there, as we call that in games, in gating, keeping players away. Because in the vanilla version, there are some chests you can access in the Dwarf Cave before the Mystic Key. So if you're saving up for the Silver Sword in vanilla version, it's a good idea to come over to the Dwarf Cave. You can pick up a few extra items and some gold before you get the Mystic Key, and then you come back with the Mystic Key, give him the TNT, and then you follow the long kind of windy dungeon of the Dwarf Cave to get to the Mystic Key door to get the rest of the stuff. But anyway, with those barrels, I would like to see them match the tiles around them, but again, I'm guessing that you would have to build new barrel sprites for each background area. So here, I want to see what we have going on here. If these are damage tiles, indeed they are damage tiles. There we go. And you notice because I record these at 30 FPS, sometimes when the screen flashes, you don't get the white flashing, and sometimes you do. It depends on which frame it initiates on. So that's part of just making these videos a little bit more manageable for my processing, because I do them at 30 FPS instead of 60. So the tunnel is built. The canal, I should say, is built. So Narek went ahead and took care of that. And now there's an interesting bit right there. As we entered that battle, I cannot see the land tile come back over that over the canal. In the vanilla version, I think what they do is they put a sea tile over the existing land tile rather than take out the land tile completely. That's a very small thing I'm noticing, and it might just be because of my frame rate thing, but I'm thinking that we're okay. So when the battle warping animation plays, often the sea tile gets removed in the vanilla version, so you can see the land tile back on there. So it's kind of an incomplete, imperfect thing. I've not double-checked on other hacks of this game to see if that's been changed or fixed. I haven't checked in ZZ or in Restored to see if that's one that they found. So this is Melmond. Melmond looks a lot like it does in vanilla. A lot of it has been desertification. You see we have sand tiles. Buildings are half destroyed. I am error. There's a little bit of humor, which I think is important for most hacks of the game. There are some serious hacks that do their best to make the closest to what would be an official release of the game. I don't think this is quite what the goal was with this. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I think this one was, that's an ignore illusion. I don't know what that means. That might portend something. but there's a couple little bits of humor in this and many hacks that kind of separate the hacks from what would be close to a commercial release. Final Fantasy Restored. So Giat comes from Thorbarden, but he's here investigating. So that name, I think, might be a reference to a later Final Fantasy. I'm not sure on that one. It's been a while since I've played FF4. So that could be a reference to a new town in this game, or a town in maybe FF4. The Terra Cave. So it's not called the Earth Cave. It's called the Terra Cave. And here's Dr. Un. And he says pretty much what he says in the vanilla version. It may be word for word. What? You never heard of me? You never heard of the great Dr. Un? We have steel armor available again, which is, I think, the case in this town. At 35,000, it's really not worth it in the vanilla version. I assume that the stats in this one are similar to the stats in the vanilla version, because most of the battle statistics in this game have been pretty much the same. I've seen a couple, like the pirates had a little hit point boost, but most things are pretty close combat-wise. That may change when we hit some bosses later. And again, this is only based on just observation of playing the game, so nothing of note there at the weapon shop. Let's take a look at our white magic. Level 4 white magic, as we know, is pretty underwhelming. I'll go back and pick up X Ice later, or A Ice from the vanilla version. But here again at level 5, we have some great ones. And I will learn the life spell. That's one of the most critical spells. That's almost the reason that you bring along the white mage. The wall spell and the life spell are great. I'll pick up Fire 3. And now here's where we also run into... sometimes only wizards can learn the spells, and that's the case for Warp. And I was just checking on that. Only a black wizard can learn the Warp spell. So I'm not going to invest too much in that. We're just going to pop over to the Earth Cave. And it's still worth it for me to fight these ogre battles, because I'll get close to 500 gold out of each one. And when we do, once you do start buying spells, it becomes very expensive, although the spells have been made a little bit cheaper in this hack. So that's another, you could call that another more player-friendly thing, or adjusting of the grind curve, which seems to have been done very thoughtfully, at least from what I can see here. Adjusting of the curve of experience and gold. The Shadow Battle is very common in the vanilla version. The Shadow sprite has been changed. It doesn't have the little the wraith, more humanoid form in this one. It uses a later undead, ghostly image for the Shadow Wraith ghost itself later on in the water shrine. But just notice that they got a surprise attack in this one, and that's a very common thing in the vanilla version. The shadows have a very unusually high surprise element to them. But we'll talk a little bit more of that when we get to the next video, because here we are at the Earth Cave. Like I said, this was just going to be a collect-a-thon. The Earth Cave is waiting for us right there with a nice new, more sinister-looking tile for the Earth Cave entrance. So next time we will tackle the Earth Cave, we'll take a look at Sarda's Cave and see what's going on with Lich.